artist, and like I said, and when I first came to Triple IT Hyderabad, I had just finished my masters and had these 6-7 years of experience of visual art and reading around it, and there were a lot of these very curious intuitions about Indian aesthetics, and there were a lot of curiosities in different painters and thinkers who would talk about certain visible invisible problems. And as promised to Udayan sir, I will quote from Paul Klee, who had once famously quoted that art does not reproduce the visible, but it makes visible. So there's kind of like a hidden ambiguous there of what is it that it makes visible. And that used to be always, whether you read Kumaraswamy and whether you read anything else, there was always this question of what is this invisible that an artist is, or what is this ambiguous that is this fascination point. K.G. Subramanian has written so much about the magic of making. What is this magical realm of art, which actually we have the burden of actualizing in a very gross form. So there's this huge, like, it's fascinating to think about it, but there's some very practical, pragmatic final destination that it has to manifest itself and things like that. So I was always curious. An enclosure that actually leaks into disclosure caught my imagination very strongly. I wouldn't say I went to Vaisheshik for it, and somehow intuitively I was always seeing this punctiform as a vibratory or dynamic trope, which is the creative principle. So my research interest was to identify what are these compositional principles of painting, specifically the art form of painting. And compositional, so there are lots of these hidden questions within it, that what is art, and within art, what are the different art forms? So that's one formal question of how do you distinguish the different forms. And within that, what is the minimal and maximal limit of identifying that? We look at different instances of painting and we know instantly that it's a painting and not a dog or a cat or something else. So that's kind of like a one level formal question of the identity of an art form. So identity and difference and so on. And there are other interests in what is the kriyatmak nature. So what is the work of art? So what is involved in a work of art to take place? So it's also a phenomenological question. It has a more kriyatmak question of how operations and functions and what all parts of reality and existence, whether material, immaterial, participate to make a certain artwork take place, and specifically the artwork of painting. So then I arrived at the trope of the patch or the stroke, and so that became my first starting point as the minimal condition or the minimal grammatical formation that is taking place. But that patch stroke is something that pushes both into a mental and post-mental as well as a material. So it's the patch and stroke is kind of a stitch across multiple realms. So the inquiry started becoming more pointed towards what are these ontological states of existence which this art form of, or the specific formal trope is actually stitching through across. And my intuition was always that it is actually multiple states coming together. So that is the first compositional principle. And for any compositional principle of this art form of painting, all of these states must necessarily come together. And they come together in this way, which is the patch or stroke. And I used to always see it as a vibratory, vacuous form. And from there on, I started chasing the Spandan or the Spandakarikas, and the entire Shastra of Spanda Shastra sort of is what I have now entered into. I don't think I'm any kind of like I'm still very amateurish in the textual tradition, but that's where I have started studying and affirming or developing my proof, etc., or validating these intuitions which are coming from experience, which are coming from a lot of other proof mechanisms that happen in our knowledge. But so I went towards that. And so all these ideas of the Spandan being a trope of which is empty and vacuous, but it creates this uchunna and spilling over. It is that kind of high intensity moment, or not moment, but it's high intensity vacuous form that allows for all other possibilities, mental as well as then congealing further. So that's the kind of research inquiry that I've been engaged in, and I'm trying to theorize what are these minimal conditions, compositional principles of painting. And so it's also a look at the micro granularity of what happens in every moment of the work involved in art, and which states participate necessarily at every state. For instance, even in one patch that has to apply a certain, my hand is involved. So physically, a lot of parts I can say are involved. But actually, even for that intention to take place, what imagination is taking place, how many parts of memory and levels of self or other post-mental states, etc. And to me, somehow, the Tattva Darshan in Spanda Shastras affirms or at least sufficiently describes all my experiential intuitions of what are the different states that are participating in that one micro tiny moment of this hand deciding right now the uchit stroke should be this. So it's, although it sounds very simple to have a stroke, but actually right there is the entire mystery and the magic of making this creative decision, and how many different parts of the universe or the world must come together for making that composure happen, is the question. So Spanda Darshan is one of the lean lines of the Kashmir Shaiv Darshans. It's like a large conglomerate, and so there's Pratyabhigya and Krama and Kula, and within that Spanda Darshan is one of them.